Today, I am giving you the final outcome of all my research regarding to the murder case of Sushant Singh Rajput. And as a doctor, as a scientist, as an investigator, I have done this job and I have spent 3 weeks after this work. And there are 3 videos. The first video will speak of what happened 6 months prior to 13th June 2020. The second video will tell you what happened on 13th June 2020. The third video is going to tell you what happened on 14th June 2020. And the rest of the videos I will do the argument to as if one does argument in the court of law. That is later, but let's come on the first video. What happened 6 months prior to 13th June 2020? There has been a volcano of jealousy suppressed under very high pressure among well-established cine stars, especially among those who have been connected to the underworld mafia directly or indirectly. These aged ones felt threatened of Sushant Singh Rajput's thunderbolt-like success and the uncontrolled surging tides of his popularity all over the world. On the other hand, his so-called girlfriend, Riya Chakravarti, has been in conspiracy with Mahesh Bhatt. Mahesh Bhatt has been in illicit relationship with Riya Chakravarti. The so-called girlfriend has never been given any public recognition by Sushant Singh Rajput for her being his girlfriend. Mahesh Bhatt was in conspiracy, collusion and abetment with the Bollywood mafia, which operated for underworld mafia of Dawood Ibrahim to get Sushant Singh Rajput out of his way to Riya Chakravarti. 6 months back, in the birthday party of Bollywood mafia Don Salman Khan, there was a fight between Sushant Singh Rajput and Suraj Pancholi, who has been a pet of Salman Khan. Suraj Pancholi and Salman Khan had been given clean chits by the police and the courts, in spite of substantive evidences against both of them for being the main party in the respective crimes. Zia Khan committed suicide after being pregnant with the baby of Suraj Pancholi, who deserted Zia Khan, who committed suicide. Salman Khan killed a man by drink driving. It is the enigma of the underworld mafia. They do the crime and they come out with clean chits. Sushant Singh Rajput had confronted Suraj Pancholi about his means Suraj Pancholi's girlfriend, Disha Salian, who was pregnant with baby of Suraj Pancholi and was deserted by Suraj Pancholi. Disha was the commercial manager of Sushant Singh Rajput. Salman Khan's mafia came into action by getting Sushant Singh Rajput out of 7 films through his mafia connections with Karan Johar, Aditya Chopra, Sajid Najiawala and so many others, bigwigs. His career was, Sushant Singh Rajput's career was made as a target of criminal sabotage through such combined conspiracy against Sushant Singh Rajput. But Sushant Singh Rajput remained unmoved by such a conspiracy or mafia working against him. He was in his own world of the research, his professional work, his social work, and he was the one which he was. Of course, it will cause agony and anxiety for which probably he consulted for little medical help. And he kept, moving ahead, nothing unaffectedly, totally. Sushant Singh Rajput was intimidated by 3 consecutive murders of his close associates. Pariksha Gupta and Manmeet Singh were murdered in the month of May 2020 under the pretext of pseudo-suicide declared by Cooper Hospital, which is specialized in giving certificate of suicide after committal of murders. On 8th of June, Disha Salyan was murdered by throwing her from 4th floor of her building during a party in which Suraj Pancholi was present. Cooper Hospital declared it suicide to give clean chit to Suraj Pancholi. It happened on 8th of June. Sushant Singh Rajput had been receiving constant threatenings of life on his mobile phone. He had changed 56 SIM cards consecutively. Riya Chakravarti and a man called Sandeep Singh had been in conspiracy with the murder mafia. Both of them had established close contacts with Sushant Singh Rajput, medical help. And he kept, moving ahead, nothing unaffectedly, totally. Sushant Singh Rajput was intimidated by 3 consecutive murders of his close associates. Pariksha Gupta and Manmeet Singh were murdered in the month of May 2020 under the pretext of pseudo-suicide declared by Cooper Hospital, which is specialized in giving certificate of suicide after committal of murders. On 8th of June, Disha Salyan was murdered by throwing her from 4th floor of her building during a party in which Suraj Pancholi was present. Cooper Hospital declared it suicide to give clean chit to Suraj Pancholi. It happened on 8th of June. Sushant Singh Rajput had been receiving constant threatenings of life on his mobile phone. He had changed 56 SIM cards consecutively. Riya Chakravarti and a man called Sandeep Singh had been in conspiracy with the murder mafia. Both of them had established close contacts with Sushant Singh Rajput, who was in his own world of intellectuality and goodwill. Both Riya and Sandeep were leaking very secret, intimate informations to murder mafia. Riya Chakravarti and Sandeep Singh, aided by the murder mafia, removed the duplicate keys of the flat of Sushant Singh Rajput and rendered the CCTV of his flat inoperative prior to 13th June, on 13th June 2020 and on 15th June 2020 as well. Both of them were closely associated with the servants of Sushant Singh Rajput. Riya Chakravarti disappeared from the flat of Sushant Singh Rajput just prior to 13th June 2020. Till 13th June 2020, there has been no scandals or talks or any rumor of mental depression of Sushant Singh Rajput by anyone in Bollywood or outside of the Bollywood, among the social circle, among his family members, among his friends. He had appeared on stage shows so many times, film parties with different, Bollywood stars, directors, producers, and other employees. he had given very many interviews on the media, and he has attended very many social events and public events in which this person called Sushant Singh Rajput was, in his full spirit and full of life, full of joy, full of, happiness, and he was in perfect, kind of well-being. Nothing was wrong with him, and nobody pointed a finger at him. They were waiting till he's murdered. Those who were interested in spreading the scandals, they couldn't spread it before his murder because there was no proof, there was no evidence. And they had been planning. There was a very big plan to turn him into, or to be, to scandalize him as a depressive patient, which he was not at all.